Well, we've reached May 14, 2026, a very significant day to myself and also to many of my usual viewers. 2 days ago, I realized something the Lord has given me, something that clearly must be shared today. 2 days ago is when I began to believe that on May 1, 2026, I spent significant time with an angel from heaven, disguised as a passenger seeking my help to board a particular flight. You see, I work as a passenger services agent for an airline in Europe, and yesterday I looked up this passenger's history with the company in our database and received powerful confirmation there that he is indeed an angel. And what I learned from the overall interaction with him is what is so exciting as it pertains to just when we are going to be boarding our flight to heaven. As I see it, this is the wildest and most exciting personal story I have ever shared. So please watch all the way to the end. Also, please reserve judgment until you've seen all the facts I will present. I think you will be very glad you did. As you can see, I am reading a pre-written script. This is because I don't want to overlook sharing any key details, nor do I want to reveal any personal details of the passenger this story is about that could be used to identify him. Doing so is illegal in my line of work. I won't be telling you his name, his flight number, nor his birthday, even though I will be giving you necessary secondary information about these facts along with other facts about him that I can share as long as you don't have his name and flight number. For the purposes of telling you this story, I will be calling this passenger John. Note that this is not his real name. I work a split shift. I clock in at 4:30 a.m. and work until 8:30, assisting with the heavy morning traffic. I live just 10-minute drive away from the airport, so after my morning shift, I go home and then come back later for the afternoon shift from 1:30 to 5:30 p.m. I first met John at work at 5 a.m. on May 1, 2026. As you may recall, that was the same day I had devoted to prayer and fasting for the rapture. Some of you all joined me in that day of prayer. John appeared to be a very typical American passenger at first. He looked to be in his 60s and was dressed casually. His appearance seemed neat and clean, and his clothes were well matched. He was traveling alone. He had the usual amount of luggage with him. There was nothing about him visually that made him stand out as anyone special. I first met him at the queue of the self-service baggage drop, as I was there making sure everyone who entered the queue had the necessary baggage tags already printed from the kiosks. At the time, I had hundreds of passengers to look out for, and he was just one of them. He approached me to ask for directions. He showed me some information on his cell phone, which he seemed to be confused about, and asked if he could now check in for his flight to the airport in America that I fly to when traveling home to see my parents. I was immediately surprised by his question, as the flight to that destination was not scheduled to depart for another 12 hours. I told him he had come too early to check in, and that he would have to wait 7 hours before being allowed to check in his bags for that flight. Naturally, he seemed surprised and disappointed to learn this. He told me he would wait at the airport until he could check in, so I directed him to the seating areas and he walked away. This initial interaction was somewhat surprising to me, as it is rare for people to show up at the airport 12 hours early, but it does happen from time to time and is not especially extraordinary. When John left me the first time, I thought I would not see him again. Boy, was I wrong. About 10 minutes later, he tries to join the queue I am guarding. I ask him where he is going, and he politely asks if he can now check in his bags for the flight. Surprised, I respond, "Like I said, sir, your flight is not until 5 p.m., and we do not allow you to check in your bags until 12:30 p.m. He comes closer to me and seeks to start up a friendly chat with me. What he is saying does not seem relevant to any help I could provide, so I politely signal that I can't talk much as I am busy watching a busy queue. So again, he walks away. This time he only goes a short distance, puts down his bag, and just stands there watching me as if waiting for me somehow. After about 5 minutes of this, I go over to him and ask if he would not rather have a seat, as he has a long time to wait. He responds that he gets bored and would rather just wait standing until he can check in his bags. So I'm thinking, okay, so you're going to stand here for over 7 hours, but I don't say that. I take the opportunity to describe to him what I would do for the day at the airport if I were in his situation. He seems grateful for this extra information and goes away. Again, I think I will probably not see him again. But about 5 minutes later, he again tries to enter my queue, and I see my coworker stop him and tell him he does not have the right bag tags for his bag in order to use the self-service bag drop. So I go over and ask him, "Sir, do you understand what I told you before? You cannot check in until 12:30. He responds calmly that he is just waiting for someone to direct him on what to do. Only at this point do I feel sure that he must not be okay mentally. So I tell him I will try to help him check in as far as possible at the self-service kiosks. I'm thinking that perhaps if I do everything I can possibly do to assist him, he will be content to leave me alone and just go wait until noon 30. So we go over to the kiosks, where I discover that our system does not even have any record of his flight that day. This is not a good sign. I immediately wonder if he is even scheduled to fly that day with our airline. So I tell him to follow me to the main full-service check-in area. There, I get behind the computer and look up his situation. I can see that he arrived with our airline on April 29 and does not have a booked flight to depart with us until May 4. So John is at the airport a full 3 days too early for his flight. Now, I have seen passengers arrive and attempt to check in for their flight 1 day too early before, but John is the first person I have ever seen try to check in multiple days too early. I look up at him and ask, "So why do you believe you have a flight scheduled for today?" He gives me a handwritten note with flight details written on it and tells me they gave me these instructions. So I ask, "Who gave you these instructions?" And he cannot tell me and seems not to know. I look at the handwritten note. It clearly states that his flight is on May 4, just as my records show, and I am shocked. It seems that not only is John forgetful and confused, he is illiterate. He seems surprised when I show him on his own notes that his flight is not scheduled until May 4. Then he expresses to me that he would really like to fly that day. He wants to go home and asks if that is possible. I tell him that he could call our customer service line to rebook his flight, but that doing so will cost a significant amount of money. I tell him we have no way to charge this change of booking fee at the airport and that he will have to call to have this done. Mind you, as I am telling him this, I am thinking that he probably does not have the mental capacity to make this call and get this booking changed. So I also tell him to wait while I go ask my supervisor about his situation. My supervisor listens to the story of my interaction with John and tells me she will handle it. She sends me back to my previous task. I tell John that it was nice meeting him, but that I have to go back to my task, and I introduce him to my supervisor, who will be assisting him further. John then warmly shakes my hand with both of his and says, "God bless you, sir. Thank you for your help." Just 10 minutes later, John comes back to me at the queue. I ask him if the supervisor was able to help him find a solution. He tells me that she was not able to help and sent him away. Great, I think. He seems to expect me to help him. So I tell him to wait while I go talk to her again. It is at this point that she calls her supervisor and a decision is made to call the police. So I go back and stay with John until police come to speak with him and assist him further. I tell him they will be coming and that I'll be waiting with him until they come. And he seems to be okay with this arrangement. So we begin to chat. I ask him why he came to Iceland. I ask who booked his ticket here. He says that his employer probably booked his tickets. I ask where he works. He says that he is a geologist and that he goes on various mission trips around the world. Now you have to know that Iceland is a highly volcanic island, so there is a great deal of geological research that takes place here. So his response seems reasonable to me. Of course, I could not just believe it, since he seems not to even be capable of reading the note in his hand, let alone holding down a job. After only a few minutes of chatting, in which I was not able to get very much personal information from him, I had to go to my next task, managing a gate. I asked a coworker to stay with him for me and left, thinking I would not see him again. But later that same evening, at around 5 p.m., I saw him walk by the check-in desk I was sitting at. He was still at the airport. I called him over to talk and asked if he had been able to find a solution to his situation. He said that yes, there is always a solution, yet seemed less than fully pleased with it. He did not give me details and he did not stay to chat long with me this time. He told me he did have somewhere lined up to stay and walked away. And that was the last time I saw him. Now, in my 2 years of experience in this job, this case was the very strangest I've ever seen. Why was John traveling alone, as someone who could not even tell me who gave him the flight details written on the note he carried, and apparently not even able to read those flight details? How did he manage in a foreign country for 2 days by himself? I wondered if this counted as some kind of elder abuse. Did a relative send their cognitively impaired relative to Iceland alone? I wondered if, on the other hand, he had been sent here by some kind of scammer. After interacting with him, I could not believe he had booked his own ticket to Iceland. It seemed that the police had not taken much interest in his situation. He was not causing any drama or disturbance at the airport after all. He was consistently a very kindly, polite, calm, older gentleman, who did not seem to be seeking any other help besides help boarding a flight that very day, that he had no right to be on. Perhaps what was strangest to me was how calm and kind his attitude remained. From my years of experience with customer service, I expect people who find themselves in situations like John's to get agitated and show a great deal of frustration, fear, or even anger when we tell them that they cannot go on the flight they think they should be on. They press and argue, they tell stories and give elaborate justifications in the attempt to get what they want. John, on the other hand, seemed to have no problem maintaining his kindly, calm attitude no matter what we told him, and he did not argue, he did not press, and he did not tell any stories or give any serious justification even for why he should be put on the flight that day. He seemed perfectly able to converse with us normally while maintaining a cool dignity no matter what. Speaking of which, he seemed to exude an aura of dignity that made you want to show him respect. Also, he seemed to know how to withhold information he was not able or did not wish to give in a way that was both self-respectful and subtle. To me, this seemed a strange show of intelligence which contradicted the idea that he was somehow demented. It was all so strange, because he did not seem at all demented, and yet at the same time, how else could you explain his consistent attempts to fly 3 days early, and even at the wrong time of day, even though the flight information he had in his hand said his flight was booked for May 4, as our records showed. I had a real sense of pity for him and thought about him quite a bit for a few days afterwards, but then life moved on and I forgot the whole thing. Then, on May 12, just a few days ago, I ended up assisting a neurologically impaired passenger at work. This caused me to remember John. Astrid and I got to talking about John's situation again. And then I realized something. May 14, the day Joshua Malekla believes we cannot pass without seeing our flight home to heaven, is May 1 on the Julian calendar. And May 1 Gregorian was the day John had attempted to fly to my home state in America, even though his booking was for May 4. As you may know, I am keenly aware that May 17 Gregorian, the day I expect our rapture, is May 4 on the Julian calendar. So I wondered, did John board his flight on May 4 Gregorian? Will we actually fly home to heaven on May 4 Julian? So yesterday at work, I looked up John in our system and found that yes, he had boarded the flight on May 4 to my home state in America. Not only that, the flight number of his flight home, when looked up in Strong's Concordance, means Yahweh's due season. In other words, God's perfect time. His journey to Iceland had begun on April 29, that is 429, the reverse of 924, a nod to September 24, when our Exodus rapture journey began. He had attempted to fly home too early on May 1, corresponding to May 14, today, and he had successfully flown home on May 4, corresponding to May 17, on a flight number which points to God's perfect time in Strong's Concordance. So I looked up the simple gematria value of his full name. It was 105, which is 69 plus 36. Just a few posts ago, I again told you all the story of my 6936 vision and how it so powerfully relates to the time of the rapture. Suffice it to say that 105 is my personal symbol of the time of the rapture, and it has been since the vision I received from God in August of 2023. And then I noticed in the company database that for his flight home on May 4, John had been randomly assigned the passenger sequence number 77. This number is the one number that identifies a specific passenger once they are checked in on a flight, and its value can range between 1 and the total number of passengers on the plane. there was about a 1 in 180 chance that John would be assigned number 77 for this flight, and yet he was. And it gets better, because he was given a seat in row 27. There were not 77 rows in the plane, so the most 77-ish row he could sit in was row 27. While I cannot reveal John's exact date of birth and what it means to me, I can tell you that his age already rounds to 23,900 days. Given everything else I know about him, I don't think that is a coincidence either. So you guys can make up your own minds about what it all means and who John really was, but I believe it means we've been trying to fly too early, and our flight does indeed leave, but not until May 4 Julian, which is May 17 Gregorian. We should have known this because the note was clearly written and in our hand. It said, the 14-15 days will pass, and on the 16-17 days will be the rapture. Joshua's October 13 vision amounts to our handwritten flight details. Why Joshua does not understand the note he is holding at this point is strange, to say the least. The true biblical month begins with a full moon, and this fact means that Israel does not cease to be 77 years old until around May 22, 2026, as I've explained in several previous posts. When we get raptured on May 4 Julian, which is May 17 Gregorian, Israel will still be 77 years old, just as John was sequence number 77 for his flight to my home state. So yeah, I think the most reasonable explanation of all the data is that John was an angel who actually had a passport and physically took the flight to Iceland on April 29, and then interacted with me all day on May 1, and then physically took the flight to my home state on May 4, all for your benefit and for mine. In any case, it is simply impossible that all these details and their obvious significance exist in this situation as they do. So praise God for what we learned from this. The rapture is on May 17, 2026.